I am Miles Seibert.
I'm Landon Ard.
And I'm Rylan Culbertson, and together we did a make-or-buy analysis on the NFL.
Our presentation will consist of the following: a description of make-or-buy, research methods, data results, and a final conclusion for our analysis.
Now we will explain make-or-buy analysis and how it applies to the NFL.
What exactly is a make-or-buy analysis? A make-or-buy analysis is widely used throughout businesses to decide if it is cheaper to make a component internally or buy it from the market. This analysis is used to show where to allocate funds within a business to decrease costs and increase production, which in turn has the opportunity to increase revenues and profits. So how do we apply a make-or-buy analysis to the NFL? The NFL is viewed as one of the largest corporations in the world, titled the National Football League. Within that massive headline lies 32 teams that account for up to $14.7 billion in revenues each year. Every year, each team has hundreds of choices to make to build their franchises. Those choices start with the NFL draft every spring. The draft can be labeled the single most important event to take place for each team in the NFL. And with those crucial picks, teams are doing what they can to build their franchises to become a Super Bowl team. What makes an NFL franchise a championship team? Building teams requires extensive research on what players to draft and pay, and which players to pick up as free agents and get away with a cheaper paycheck. When referring this back to make-or-buy analysis, teams have to decide whether to in-source players or draft or outsource players signing free agents.
Next, we will discuss the methods for collecting data. The following slides will summarize the overall factors and methods we use for collecting and analyzing the data for our project. The first step in our project was to accumulate a master database. Our master database contains 9 consecutive years, starting in 2005, going through 2014. For each year, the factors that we collected contain 32 teams per year, a 53-man roster, the team name, the player name, the position, years of experience, acquisition method, the college, other experience, team record, winning percentage, Pro Bowl, and All-Pro players. From this master database, we analyzed and compared teams in the NFL in an effort to decide whether it is better to make or buy NFL players to win championships. After making our master database, we next broke this master database down and compared every NFL team on the following factors: winning percentages versus losing percentages in the NFL, the number of Pro Bowl players, the number of All-Pro players, the number of drafted players, and the number of free agent players per team. Next, we will describe the methods that we use to analyze these factors.
In our data analysis, the top 4 teams that we used each year from 2005 to 2013 were the teams that played in the conference championship game each year. The bottom 4 teams were the teams with the worst winning percentages in the league each of these seasons. Our efforts were more focused directly on the Super Bowl winners and the very worst teams in the league, while still using all the stats from the 8 teams each year. Our ultimate question was answered through these statistics to find if it was better to draft players or buy players in free agency.
Charts show the teams we use to conduct our analysis.
In the second part of our data analysis, we first turned our focus towards drafted players and free agent players on each team. The results showed that the numbers were very similar in that about half and half of drafted players and free agent acquisitions when comparing the 4 best teams and worst teams. This gave us no real correlation, so we looked at other data to support our eventual findings.
The results can clearly be seen in this figure based on the number of undrafted versus drafted players per team. The results prove there is little insight when comparing the championship and losing teams on the basis of NFL and free agent players. The data results show that championship teams from 2005 through 2014, their rosters are made up of roughly 49.41% of drafted players and 50.51% of free agent players on average. The data also shows that the 4 losing teams' rosters from 2005 through 2015 were compiled up of 49.66% of drafted players and 50.28% of free agent players on average. Based on this information, both the championship and losing teams' rosters were compiled up of roughly 50% free agents and 50% drafted players. Therefore, we could not conclusively determine if drafted players or free agent players led to championships.
3 in our data analysis shows us Pro Bowl players and All-Pro players on winning and losing teams. This is where we found major differences between the top and bottom teams in the NFL. The numbers are drastically different in showing that winning teams contain many more of these high-caliber players that are getting the nod for Pro Bowl selections and All-Pro selections.
This chart clearly displays the championship teams and losing teams in the NFL based on the factor of Pro Bowl players and All-Pro players per team. This chart shows years 2005 through 2014. These results show that there is 4.75 times more Pro Bowl selections on championship teams opposed to losing teams. On average, there is 5.33 Pro Bowl selections per championship team, whereas the losing teams average 1.11 per team. When comparing All-Pro players, there are 7.31 times more All-Pro player selections on championship teams compared to the losing teams. All-Pro players on championship teams average 2.64 players per team compared to All-Pro players on losing teams, which average 0.38 players per team. The data shows that this is an extremely strong relationship between championship teams having drastically more Pro Bowl and All-Pro players compared to the losing teams. We can conclusively conclude that championship teams in the NFL have considerably more Pro Bowl as well as All-Pro players compared to the losing teams in the NFL.
During step 4 of our data analysis, we found out which players, Pro Bowl and All-Pro players, that were either drafted by the team they were playing for or were they selected as free agents. This set gave us another staggering result showing another divide in the data. The numbers were swayed heavily towards drafted players being the main source of team success and these players becoming Pro Bowl and All-Pro players.
These figures clearly show the number of Pro Bowl and All-Pro players for the losing and winning teams that were drafted or that were free agents. This data shows that there were 5.15 times more drafted Pro Bowl selections on championship teams opposed to losing teams. On average, there was 5.58 drafted Pro Bowl selections per championship team, whereas the losing teams only averaged 1.08 per team. Championship teams have 115 more drafted Pro Bowl and All-Pro players than free agents. The worst teams only have 25 more drafted Pro Bowl and All-Pro players than free agents. This given data suggests that there is a significant correlation between championship teams and a high number of drafted players. The data set also suggests that the worst teams have a noticeably lower number of Pro Bowl and All-Pro players that were drafted. We can conclude from this evidence that teams have drastically more drafted players than the losing teams. Based on our data, this does not give us any kind of evidence that championship teams have more drafted players than free agents, but it does suggest that championship teams have more drafted Pro Bowl and All-Pro players than free agents. It also suggests that drafted players are more likely to become Pro Bowl and All-Pro players opposed to free agent players.
Why is the factor of Pro Bowl and All-Pro players significant? These players are voted as the best players at their position for the corresponding year. This suggests that these players during their Pro Bowl or All-Pro selection years made significant positive impacts on their teams. The data correlates by showing how more All-Pro players and Pro Bowl selections there is a better chance of having a championship season than a losing season.
When we look at our data as one body of work, we can conclude that our data does not give evidence that championship teams have more draft picks than free agents. However, there is evidence that championship teams have a significantly greater amount of Pro Bowl and All-Pro selection compared to the worst teams.
So should NFL teams make or buy players? We suggest it is better to make players through draft picks rather than selecting free agents.
Our data shows that the majority of Pro Bowl and All-Pro players have been drafted by their respective teams. Therefore, we strongly advise franchises to focus more on making smart draft choices because our research has proven that draft picks are more likely to become Pro Bowl and All-Pro players, which proves to lead to championship seasons. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will begin by talking about the
I got your water.
Dude, you know we're filming right now. God,
Chill.
fuck, man.